Okay, we're going to quickly talk about the complex number system for SAT prep. So this is the 2-minute video, very short. Sometimes with all the common assessments and everything, we don't go over this, but it's definitely something you need to know for your SAT. The complex number system includes real numbers and complex numbers. Usually when mathematicians talk about complex numbers, they're really talking about your eyes that you learned about last year. And usually the real numbers are these numbers here. So what we have here in purple is your natural numbers, which are included in the whole numbers, which are included in the integers, which are included in the rationals, then the irrationals. So let's talk about what all this means. And then we'll go back to this slide. Your natural numbers are the numbers you learned in pre-K. And from what I remember about pre-K from my daughter is she had to pick the teacher would show a number and she had to recite the number, and they did the numbers 1 to 100 for her to get a good mark. The natural numbers are the first numbers that you learn, and what you start with is 1, 2, 3, all the way on to however high you want to go. So they're just called the counting numbers. The next thing you learned is the concept of zero. So the only difference between the whole numbers and the natural numbers is the whole numbers include zero. And remember, zero is kind of hard, especially in kindergarten or first grade, when it's pretty abstract, thinking that zero, it means nothing, or you take away nothing. Okay, the integers is the z. That's when you all started learning the concept of negative numbers. So basically, you're including your 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. However, you learned about -1, -2, and so forth on down. So those are your integers. Your rationals are it's the Q, probably because of quotient, starts with Q. And that's our numbers that can be expressed in fraction form. So for example, 1/2, 3/4. We're going to include decimals. 0.6, which would be 6/10, and including negatives. So -0.5, -0.75, and so forth. So it's a progression. Just think of the number system, the progression of numbers as you learn them. Okay, when you got into high school or even middle school, you learned about irrationals. Irrationals are numbers that can't be expressed in form of a simple fraction like we did above. For example, pi. It continues on and on. All right? Irrational numbers are those numbers that cannot be represented as terminating or repeating decimals. Okay? Square root of 2. E, Euler's constant. We're going to learn more about this year. We'll talk about how E arises, but it's usually this number, and it continues on. Okay, and then your complex numbers are the ones where you would come up when you're trying to solve equations and you got square root of -1, and we decided to call that I. And then we squared I and got -1 and so forth. And that's your complex numbers. Now the reason I bring this up, let me talk about this real quick. So in this case, when you see a plus bi, a is the real component, and the bi is the complex component. And the reason I bring this up is on the SAT, they talk about integers a lot. So the ones they are talking about are these right here. My daughter came home from her PSAT this year from October and asked me, does 0 belong to the integers? And I told her yes. And she said, well, she missed that problem. So you have to be very careful to notice that when the SAT stipulates that we're talking about integers, that means it can't include fractions. But it can include the whole numbers and the natural numbers. In some countries, they just combine these two here. All right. So remember the integers mainly for your SAT. So let's go back to the first slide. Okay. Complex number system. The way I like to look at it as, I'm going to call this the apartment complex. If I call this the apartment complex, and the name of it is apartment complex, something like that, I can see the sets as this. I'm going to call the natural numbers the bathroom. Sounds weird, but it's kind of a good visual on how to see this. The bathroom is in the bedroom. The bedroom is in the apartment. All right, and the apartment is in the section of the 3 bedrooms, which would be this part. And the irrationals would be the part, well, you could actually make a circle here for the irrationals, so this includes the whole thing. Kind of put it all together. And then the complex numbers is like the cars, the parking lot. So one's inside the other. So if I have the integers here, that means it includes the wholes and the naturals, but it wouldn't include the rationals. Okay? So this is just the building of the number system. Let's write all this out. We have the natural numbers. And this is called blackboard bold. When I'm doing this double line here, it represents the number system, or the numbers in the number system. This is the naturals. W we usually you don't use that much, or like I said, in some countries they call these two the same anyway. The integers, all right, which does include 0, and the way we would say that is 0 belongs to the integer, the set of integers. Then we have the rationals, or you can say fractions and decimals. Irrationals, whoops. Some notations will just call this irrationals with the I. And then we have the complex numbers. Here. And one last note. On the 0 here, let's just do that now. Remember, 1 divided by nothing doesn't even make sense. You can't divide anything by nothing, so that's undefined. And nothing divided by some number x is nothing. Okay.